All right, so it's time to do a little maintenance on the wheel loader. And I had a bracket for the hinge come loose. You can see right there, lost one of the screws and the other screw is loose. So I'm gonna have to put a new screw in it. And so there you see I got the new screw in, tightened the other screw. So that was a fairly easy job there to do. And that's the only thing I've had come loose on this machine. Now what I've been having problems with is the hydraulics for the lift arms are a little bit slow, and I lost a lot of power. And I did add some hydraulic oil. It helped a little bit. It wasn't that it was low on oil, so they're still running a little bit on the weak side. So what I got to do is replace the seals inside the cylinders and hope that is the issue. And so that's what this video is going to be about, is rebuilding or replacing the seals inside the cylinders. Now, as you can see, there's a lot of oil on the outside of the pistons on both sides. You can see all the dirt had built up. It's been leaking for some time. Now, that shouldn't cause any issue with regards to how these operate, but you will lose hydraulic fluid out those seals. Now, I'm not going to show the seal replacement for the piston in this video, but I will show it in Wednesday's video on its own. Now there you can see I love those flanged pins. You just pull one fastener out and the pin pops out and boom, your cylinder is free, at least on the top side right there, that easily. And the same at the bottom right there, another flanged pin. So one screw and that pin pulls out. And you can see that's real easy to do right there. And it's just a longer pin on the bottom. Now, the only issue with the bottom part is there are 5 washers, spacers that they use on that arm. There's one of them. And so those are all going to come out if you pull this whole cylinder out of here. Even just pulling the pin out, you're going to wind up losing some of those washers. As you can see right there, 3 on the left side, looking at it from the front, and there's 2 on the right side. So we just got to get those washers back in place after we get this done. So take the hoses loose off of there, and you can see there's a washer, and it's flat on one side on that back end, and that's got to fit in there just right where it won't seal. So we'll pay attention to that when we put it back together. And here we have a controlled mess, but I want to get that hydraulic fluid out of that cylinder. So I take it apart. It won't be squirting all over me. And I was real happy when I was taking the screws out of here. There wasn't any Loctite on them. So they were tight, but it was real easy to break them loose and to get them out of here. So I just went around and just broke them all loose before getting started taking them all out of there. And it was really relatively easy getting this thing apart, which made me real happy. Having to fight with these fasteners sometimes is half the challenge. All right, now getting this thing apart is relatively easy. Just a quick snap and boom, pops right out of there. So now we have 4 seals in that cylinder to replace. And there's a compression ring on the back side of that piston as well. So we'll want to replace all 4 of those. The 2 seals on the top, that just prevent leakage from coming out the top of the flange. but those two down there by that compression ring are the ones that may be giving me some issue if they're bleeding by, as far as not being able to get the power that I need out of this machine. All right, now this machine actually came with a bunch of O-rings with it, which was really nice. I was happy to see that when I got the machine, because I knew at some point the rings would have to be replaced on this. So it's nice that they actually sent some to come with it. And so we just kind of match those rings up to the size that we need to replace on there. And it's going to be 2 of each of the same size for that piston. And what I did too is I took some measurements off of those, because I know I'm going to have to order some more O-rings for future replacement. So I want to make sure I get the right O-rings. Now really, when you're taking your measurements, all you should need is your inside diameter and the thickness of the ring. And you add those up, that should give you the outside. So I take the outside measurement just to confirm my measurements. Most of the time it'll give you all 3 measurements when you're buying your O-rings, but the primary is the inside diameter and the thickness of the ring. Now, if you don't have one of these, you'll want to get one of these. If you buy a kit, which you'll wind up with a lot of O-rings that you don't need, you can get kits that have these little tools with them to help you get the O-rings out. And they're real similar to this dental tool, but I use these in my hobby a lot, so it's something I had sitting around. But definitely a must-have for getting these rings. And don't worry about not tearing them up when you take them off, because they're garbage. So don't worry about poking a hole in them. It's a good way to actually get a good hold on them to get them out of there. So we're not going to be reusing them anyway. So we'll take those out, match them up, and then we'll get them put back on with the new ones. Now, I should have started with these first O-rings, the smaller ones up at the top here. I wouldn't have to mess with fighting or getting them through those other channels. But as you can see, I slide it down and I'll put it in the first slot. So that way when I put the other ring on, it will slide right past that first one and then just go right into the second slot. So there's no need to try to pull it out of the first one to push it down. Because as you can see, if I'd had those O-rings in, then I wouldn't have had to try to maneuver this ring back out of those slots. But as you see, as we get down here now, I just slide it on and just go right over that other ring and right into the second slot. And voila, that easy, the sills are replaced. So all those O-rings are done now, and that cylinder is rebuilt. Now at this point, you want to take that ring off the top, the connection rod, and replace your piston ring if you're doing this all at once. And those are on the inside of your flange. However, like I said, I will be doing another video because a lot of times those are what leak, those are what's going to be your problem. You may not need to rebuild the whole cylinder, so we'll just do that on a separate video showing how to replace just those inner rings so that we can do those by themselves. So that'll be on Wednesday's video. Now you'll notice right here, ran into a little problem. Two of the holes didn't line up. And I thought all the holes were evenly spaced. They are not. It's actually almost like a set of 3 on each side. that are evenly spaced. So we got to get those lined up. So we got to take all the screws back out. And so what you might want to do is mark the flange and the cylinder for ease of alignment, so we can get it back in, or just take note of how those align. It is pretty hard to tell, but there's just a little bit more spacing between each set of 3. And so we got to get all those holes lined up just right so all the screws will go in. I got all but 2 of them in, and so I didn't even think about it, but yeah, just keep note of that when taking these things apart. Now here's that flat washer, or the washer that has that flat side that I told you about. That goes on that back or bottom connector for the hydraulic hose. So we want to make sure that that gets back on there. And once we get the thread started, then we'll make sure that that's aligned. And you'll see me working that here with the screwdriver just a little bit. Once I get those threads started, then I'll work that washer, get the flat side aligned with the top of the cylinder where it needs to be, and then finish tightening it back up. So the other thing to remember, if you've taken all your hoses off, is just make sure the orientation, how the hoses are. The bottom one faces up the cylinder a little bit, top one faces down the cylinder, so you're not causing any kinking during operation. I'm not gonna lie, this was a little bit more of a difficult project. It's a really tight fit in there, and the way the hoses connect and everything, it was a little bit of a challenge getting everything off and attached to that cylinder. So just be patient and just work it. Be careful not to cross thread anything, and it will take a little extra time. You could buy yourself some more space by taking the front tires off, but you're gonna have to prop the machine up to help yourself out there if you do that as well. So any which way you do it, it's not super easy, but it's very doable. I thought that was difficult getting the hoses back on. Here comes the real challenge, getting those spacers or washers back in with that pin and the cylinder, and getting them on the right side. So remember, it's 3 towards the outside of the machine, 2 towards the inside, and it's tight fit. So I'll just let you see how I do it. It is a little bit challenging, but again, it's still doable. The two inside ones were definitely the hardest. We got the hoses in the way, so trying to do it with the long needle noses even, it was not happening. So you can see I'm just sliding the washer down the side of the machine and getting it in place, and then pushing the rod or pin into the washer hole, and then I'd back it out just a little bit, make room for the second one, and I would slide the second one down. I think I had to do it twice here to get it lined up and then get it pushed the rest of the way in. That was the easiest way I found to be able to do it. And now I'm checking, make sure that everything's in place. I got the pin all the way in. Got the 2 washers on the inside. I got the 3 washers on the outside. So those washers / spacers are all in place. Pins in, and then all I have to do is line up my hole, put a screw in, and that one's done and in place. Now that I've showed you the hard way, let me show you the easy way to do this. After you take the rod off the arm there, all you got to do is take the screws out of the flange, and we'll be able to pull that out to rebuild it without even having to take the whole cylinder out. Now that was a lot easier. So just as simple to put it back together. Now I did mark the flange and the cylinder so I could get my holes closer to lined up right out the gate. And so once I get that in there, it's real easy to manipulate that and get it twist just a little bit that you need to get those holes lined up, and then all 6 of them will line up. It's real easy to get those screws put back in then. Alright, so right here is our fill cap for the hydraulic oil, and use caution getting this fill cap out. It takes the 3mm Allen wrench, and when I've been working with this, a couple times I've dropped this cap down into the machine and it's a booger to fetch out of there. So what you'll see me doing here is reaching behind the copper spacer for that upper plate. Once I get it unscrewed a little bit right there, don't try to pull it out. Get my finger in behind, and that will keep that cap from falling down into the machine. Now this is the oil filler that come with the machine, and that O-ring was glued in place on there, but I figured with the oil and everything it'd break loose, so I did put some tape on there when I first got it, just to make sure I could get that O-ring back in the same spot in case it broke loose, which it has. So, but that acts as a nice spacer. So you squeeze the oil in, and then you let the bottle suck it back out. Whatever's in the tube will suck back into the bottle, but if you see air bubbles, you need to add more oil. So you just fill it until you suck oil back out of the tank, and that's your fill mark. Kind of like a dipstick. And it already feels like it has a lot more power on that upstroke. Because I'd noticed even getting a load of the rock in there that it was having trouble lifting the load of rock. And I was putting a lot of pressure on it there. So it definitely feels like it's got more power, so we'll have to test it out and see how it performs working. But I'm going to top off the hydraulic fluid now that I've got the air out of those cylinders, and then we'll be able to go give this guy a test run. Same thing here when putting the cap back in. Make sure you get your finger back around there. So if that cap slips, you'll be able to catch it before it drops down into that machine. Next project. That'll be next.